Okay, so welcome to the Anatomy and Physiology lesson on the digestive system. So digestive system, we're first of all going to look at the structures that represent the system and what each of those structures, functions and responsibilities are. We're going to look at what we call accessory organs. So we have organs that are accessories to digestion. So they don't perhaps follow the tract of digestion through the system, which will become clear in a moment, but they are an accessory organ that aid with the digestive process. And lastly, we'll look at the functions of the digestive system. So we split the digestive system into the upper structures, the middle structures, and the lower structures. The first one we're going to look at, which is really easy to visualize, it's our mouth. So the upper structures are the mouth and the esophagus, the first part of the digestive process. So in the mouth, we're very aware of how we start digestion because we are consciously doing that action. So we obviously put food into our mouth and we have a process of chemical digestion and mechanical digestion that occur in the mouth. The mechanical digestion is our teeth. So we use our teeth and our tongue, the sides of our mouth, to move the food, start to break the food down into smaller particles that's going to be easier to swallow. So that's our mechanical, the use of the teeth, the tongue, and the sides of the mouth. And then the chemical digestion occurs through the use of the saliva. So the saliva in our mouth has an additive in it called amylase. And that amylase starts to break down aspects of the food that we're eating, predominantly carbohydrates. So the breakdown of carbohydrates begins in the mouth using the amylase that's in our saliva. So eventually, by use of the mechanical and the chemical digestive process in the mouth, we have something that's much easier to swallow than what we would have had when we bit the bit of the sandwich or the bit of apple. And that is referred to as a bolus, B-O-L-U-S. So when we're ready to swallow the food that's been partly digested in the mouth, it's called a bolus. Bit like a ball of food. And all of that process, remember, is under our conscious control. So when we've talked about muscular movements and muscular tissue, we've had those muscular tissue that's under voluntary control, the ones that we are deciding how to use. So our chewing and then our swallowing is under conscious control. So we swallow that bolus under conscious control, and now we don't have to think about that food anymore because it's going to be moved by our visceral muscular tissue, the smooth muscular tissue that's not under conscious control. So I've swallowed, now I don't have to think about it anymore. So the bolus works its way down the esophagus, which we would know as the food pipe. And that action, we've heard it before, is that peristaltic action. Peristalsis is a rippling muscular action that moves things through our digestive system, and that is not under our conscious control. So that bolus, we swallow it, and peristalsis, and a bit of gravity as well, moves that bolus down the esophagus. Now, do you remember last week we talked about that we've got two pipes there. We've got the windpipe, the trachea, and we've got the food pipe, the esophagus. And we had that little flap, didn't we, the epiglottis. And so remember that when we were talking about breathing last week, when we're breathing, that epiglottis is covering the esophagus, the food pipe. But now we're talking about swallowing. When we swallow, the epiglottis flips the other way to stop that bolus or any food going into the trachea. So little flaps saying, are you breathing? Are you eating? Are you breathing? Are you eating? And it covers the appropriate pipe that isn't being used. So upper structures, mouth and esophagus, probably the part of the digestive system that we're very aware of because we have some conscious control over that. Our food, once it comes down the esophagus, we now go into our middle structures, and there's just one middle structure, which is the stomach. So our food enters our stomach. And it sits there for around 4 to 6 hours. And in that time, we've got gastric juices that are being released by the lining of the stomach that turn that bolus into chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. So it breaks it down even further into a looser substance. Our stomach also has lots of folds, and these are called rugae, R-U-G-A-E. Think about it, you know, like those ripply dogs with lots of folds. Think about the stomach like that. And the reason the stomach has these rugae is so it can expand. So we can fill it with food and it's got all those folds that are able to expand, and then it can fold back on itself as the stomach is empty. So process of digestion is continuing in the stomach. The main substance that's broken down by the gastric juices in the stomach is protein. So our carbohydrates were being broken down by the amylase in our saliva, in our mouth. If you think when you eat some bread, it starts to become sticky and broken down the more you eat it. That's your amylase. Breaking down bread is a great example of a carbohydrate. Now we're in the stomach. Let's say we've eaten a ham sandwich. Our stomach is going to be breaking down the ham because that is the protein part of our meal. So gastric juices further breaking down, further digesting the food we're eating, particularly protein. Remember, it's the rippled effect of the stomach is able to expand and ripple back again. Okay, so our stomach has done the job it needs to. And so now the food is going to go into our lower structures. So our lower structure, you can see the stomach here, and that's feeding into the small intestine. So all of this coiled area here is the small intestine. So it begins, and the first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. D-U-O-D-E-N-U-M. And if you look at the duodenum, there is something else, I have to turn it, that's attached to it. We'll talk about that in a moment. So food comes out of the stomach, it's not food anymore, chyme, remember, and that comes into the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine is the duodenum, and then the next sections, and there's no cut-off point because it'll be different on everybody, but the next two sections of your small intestine is the jejunum and the ileum. So jejunum is J-E-J-U-N-U-M, and ileum, I-L-E-U-M. So 3 sections to the small intestine, but the duodenum is the one for you to be most aware of. Most absorption takes place here. So the walls of the small intestine are very thin, and the nutrients and substances that the body requires will be absorbed into the blood circulation, mainly in the small intestine, mainly in that duodenum. At the same time, the duodenum is also, or the small intestine is also contributing to digestion, and it's responsible for the breakdown of fats. So with your ham sandwich, this is where the butter gets broken down or digested. The length of the small intestine in total is about 6 meters, and it's coiled to fit into the abdomen. So food, the chyme comes into the duodenum, the fats get broken down, and now we're looking at absorption. The nutrients, the substances within the food that the body requires will be absorbed into the bloodstream from the small intestine. So it's coiling around the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum, and then it's going to come to our next structure. But I just want to point out this little hook here, because we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. When we talked about lymphatic tissue, we talked about the appendix. Here is your appendix. So as the small intestine joins on to what's our large intestine, we've got the little hook there of the appendix, which is going to help immunity in that area. So any harmful substances are going to be engulfed in the appendix. So we talked about it, hard to visualize it, but now you can see where it sits, and a really good place for it to sit, because by now we know there's nothing left that's of any use. So anything harmful gets deposited. So as soon as what is remaining goes into our colon, absorption is completed. There's no nutrients left in the food that started up here. So all the good processes have happened. Literally now we are dealing with waste and water, excess water. So enters the colon, and the colon sits, so it doesn't break off, it's just obviously broken here to show the small intestine, that continues. So we have our ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and then it looks like it goes across, but it actually goes backwards. It's hard to draw that. This is the sigmoid colon. You don't particularly need to know the names, but makes sense. Ascending, transverse, descending. This then goes backwards, the sigmoid colon, and then we've got our exit. Remember, everything's still moving through this with that peristaltic action. We don't have to think about this. We might be aware of gurgling movements, a bit of pain, a bit of trapped air, but we don't have to think about all of this occurring until our waste gets to the exit. And that's when our conscious control, hopefully, kicks into power again. So we choose when to swallow. That's under voluntary control, skeletal muscular tissue. We then revert into visceral muscular tissue, this smooth muscle, which is sending the food around. And then it's back under our conscious control when we eliminate the waste. So remember, by the time the food, if we can even still call it food, but what's remaining of it enters the colon, it is now waste. There is no absorption other than water. So if we hold waste in our colon for a long time, we can find that that becomes harder and drier because excess water will be taken away from the waste. So it's important that we clear the colon regularly to avoid losing that excess water and everything becoming a little bit difficult to move. So that is the route that your food takes from ingestion to elimination. And in the process, we've had digestion and absorption happen. So we have some accessory organs that the food hasn't moved through, but they're going to be there to help. So first of all, we're going to talk about this organ here, which is the liver. Our liver is responsible for filtering and detoxification. We store iron and glycogen at our liver, in our liver. Glycogen is what we would use for energy to muscles. When we talked about the muscular system, I think I said about you've got about 90 minutes store of glycogen in your liver. So after 90 minutes, you need some form of sugar, carbohydrate, fat to restore energy levels. So filtering, detoxification and storage of iron and glycogen. But also the main part of this to do with digestion is that the liver produces bile. And bile is a gastric juice. It's a substance that helps with the digestive process. So when the liver has produced the bile, it sends it to our next accessory organ, which is the gallbladder. So can you see that's linked then to the gallbladder? And our gallbladder is connected to the liver and to the duodenum. Oh, I can't see. So liver produces bile, the bile is stored at the gallbladder, and when it's required in the duodenum for digestion, it's released. So produced, stored, and used. And that aids digestion, probably of fats, because that's where the breakdown of fat starts to occur. So liver is to do with detoxification and filtration. It stores glycogen and iron, but its main purpose in digestion is that it produces bile. Our next organ is the gallbladder. The gallbladder just stores the bile that's being produced. And then when it's required by the duodenum, the first part of this small intestine, the bile will be secreted from the gallbladder into the duodenum to aid digestion. So if you have your gallbladder removed, we can live without our gallbladder because effectively it's just a storage unit of bile. But that means that as the liver produces bile, it's got nowhere to sit ready to be used. So it's just going to be continuously going into the duodenum. So when people have their gallbladder removed, they're often told to have a low-fat diet because the gallbladder, it can't secrete the bile on demand. It's just coming as the liver makes it. And so that might not come while we're digesting those fats. So it can interfere with the digestion of fats. So gallbladder we can live without, effectively it's just a storage unit, but it just means there isn't a constant supply and demand of the bile. Lastly, we've got another organ here, accessory organ, which is shooting off to this side, which is the pancreas. You can see that that too is joined to the duodenum. So our pancreas is actually a gland, and it's both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. Endocrine glands are glands that produce hormones. And so our pancreas is able to produce hormones, and those hormones are responsible for regulating blood sugar levels. So the pancreas as an endocrine gland, and we will look at the endocrine system in another session, produces insulin and glucagon. And those are hormones that will regulate blood sugar. Now, that's not particularly to do with digestion, because that's about keeping the level of sugar the right level within the body. So the pancreas is also an exocrine gland, and it produces more digestive juices that are secreted into the duodenum. And you can see that it is linked along with the gallbladder and the stomach to the duodenum. So in terms of digestion, we are thinking of the pancreas as an exocrine gland, which means that it produces something that is secreted to aid something. So sweat glands are exocrine glands. So it produces gastric juices, and those are secreted into the duodenum to aid with digestion. But your pancreas has this offshoot in that it is an endocrine gland as well, and that produces hormones. So when you looked at that to begin with, you might have thought, oh, I think I know some of those structures, but now you know them all. So you can track the food going through the digestive system. And then you can look at your 3 accessory organs and know that they're having an impact on digestion. The food isn't going anywhere through those, but what they produce or store is having an impact on our body's ability to digest. So remember the ham sandwich theory, that carbohydrates are broken down in the mouth by the amylase that's in the saliva. So obviously our crunching and moving of the food around our mouth, the mechanical digestion aids that, but specifically carbohydrates are broken down chemically in the mouth. So that's the bread of your sandwich. Then that bolus moves down into the stomach, and the stomach is then going to produce its own gastric juices, which are going to start to break down the protein, so the ham in our sandwich. And then that bolus is going to turn into chyme, which is going to work its way into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, where we're going to have gastric juices, bile that's been produced in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and given to the duodenum to help to break down fats, the butter of our ham sandwich, but also we've got gastric juices coming from the pancreas as well to help to finish the process of digestion. The food, if we can call it that at that point, but whatever it is, works its way through all those 6 meters of small intestine, and at the same time, absorption is taking place. So the nutrients that are stored within that food are being absorbed into the blood circulation and sent around the body for growth, repair, energy, etc. And then what's left as we enter the large intestine is just waste and water. So that works its way up, over, down and back and out of the body when we are happy to do so. So really then that talks about the 4 functions. So the functions of the digestive system is to get what we put in our mouth through our body, taking from it what we need and then getting rid of the waste. So very simple. It doesn't have lots of offshoots. It's just top to bottom, quite literally, taking what we can from it on the way. So the 4 labels that we would give to the functions is, number 1 would be ingestion, I-N, gestion, or mastication. So the process of what's happening in the mouth. So remember, we've got the chewing action, which is mechanical digestion starting, and we've got the use of the amylase in the saliva, which is going to start to break down, so chemical digestion. So that digestion is starting in the mouth. So that would be referred to as ingestion or mastication. Your second function is digestion. That food moves from one area to another area through that peristaltic action, those visceral muscular tissue, moving the food through the digestive system. Digestion just means getting from one place to another through that digestive system. On the way, we've still got chemical digestion taking place. So extra chemicals will be added to break down the protein, for example, in the stomach, and the fats in the duodenum. The third function is absorption. So a function of the digestive system is that we don't just eat the food and then it passes straight back out of us in the same condition that it was in to begin with. We have extracted the nutrients from it, broken them down, made them small enough so when the food enters the small intestine, the wall of the small intestine is very fine, and the blood circulation then will collect the nutrients. So they'll be absorbed into the body, taken by the blood circulation for use. And our last function is elimination. So once the process of digestion has occurred, the digestive system is able to eliminate waste. Remember, that comes back under our voluntary skeletal, or our skeletal muscular tissue, which is voluntary. But the process in between swallowing the food and releasing the waste is all not under conscious control. So a system where a lot happens and is happening all of the time. If you think about the meals and snacks that we eat throughout the day, there probably is never a point in your waking life that your body isn't digesting, and probably digesting two things. So you eat your breakfast, you might have a snack at mid-morning, so your breakfast hasn't gone all the way through before the snack's coming, and then the snack hasn't gone all the way through before the lunch is coming, and so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of our body's energy to digest food, and obviously the body's having to do lots of other things as well at the same time. So digestion does take away from other processes that are going on in the body. So how does this relate to our treatments? Because yes, it's great to know about digestion, really good for us to know how our digestive system works, but how is this relating to our clients and their treatments? Digestion is massive with clients, and particularly with clients and stress. I think we could all nod along now and know that stress affects our digestive system. Absolutely. Even to the point where you're feeling stressed or anxious, and that feeling of butterflies. So it could be excitement or nervousness, anxiety of some sort. What happens when we are stressed or anxious is our body goes into a fight or flight scenario. So our blood doesn't want to be at our stomach. Like, we can deal without the stomach right now. We need the blood at the eyes, we need them at the ears, the nose, the muscles, the brain. We need to be ready to fight or flight whatever it is that's coming to attack us. And so inevitably that's going to affect our digestion, because our blood can't be all here ready for us to act and then here digesting our porridge from this morning. It just can't do both. And so when we find clients or people ourselves in highly stressful situations, our blood is being diverted away from our digestive system. First of all, that's going to make us not hungry, so we're going to lose our appetite. So you're going to see clients in a stressful situation or ongoing long-term stress with a reduction in appetite, purely because the blood's not there. It's like, no, we don't want you to eat because we can't be there to digest the food. But we also have that in a situation, and I think I talked about this when we talked about the skin. When we are hot, our blood is diverted to our skin to cool us down. And again, the blood can't be in two places at once. It can't be cooling us down at the surface of our skin and in the centre of our body digesting a massive hot pot. So when it is hot and sunny, or we are hot, we tend not to want to fancy those big stodgy meals that our body effectively knows is going to take quite a lot of work to digest, because the blood's going to have to be at the digestive system, but it's trying to cool us down. So we intrinsically want to choose much easier to digest food. In the winter, the blood is always at the centre of our body. So it's there, it's like, yes, feed me some dumplings, feed me a Yorkshire pudding. I'm there already, I can digest the lot. So again, we want warm food because it's cold, but there is a physiological reason why we are able to eat those sorts of foods when it's cold. So with our clients then thinking about stress levels, so thinking about ways in which that stress could affect their digestive system. So if they are under sudden stress, they might find they suffer with something called irritable bowel syndrome. And that can manifest itself in lots of different ways. So can manifest itself in constipation, which our massage would be really good at helping, particularly the abdomen massage that we learn in Swedish body massage and aromatherapy. That could help the peristalsis to kick in and help to clear any waste that is sort of backed up. But clients could also suffer the opposite. So they could suffer onsets of diarrhea, very sudden. That's very common. Again, if you think I've just eaten a meal and now I'm in a stressful situation, my blood can't get to my digestive system to digest it. It needs to deal with other stuff. It's just going to get it out of my body. Get this out of the body so we don't have to be dealing with what's going on in her digestive system. We can then deal with this stressful situation, so get it out. When we go into labour, we tend to get rid of everything. Often people are sick, they often need to empty out from every area. Because again, we're about to do something really big. We can't be digesting, the hot pot. We need to be focusing on the task in hand. So the body is very clever at eliminating what it can't handle in order to deal with the most important task. So think about that with your clients and stress. The main cure for it is going to be a reduction in stress. Perhaps the cure for that is going to be regular treatments. I think digestion is something that comes up really regularly in consultations. It tends to be, if you talk to clients about issues that they're coming to you with, digestion is probably one of the top issues. It does tend to be something when we have a stressful situation that our digestive system is affected by that. So decreasing stress levels, making clients aware of their digestion, aware of how their stress is affecting digestion, and using treatments if that helps with their stress levels to aid that, treating the cause, the root cause, can definitely help, making them more mindful. Obviously, there's a whole host of things, food intolerances or allergies. We're not going to be qualified in anything of that like, but it might be that if you're hearing things from your client that possibly relate to something, you could refer them or talk to them about the possibility of seeing somebody that could diagnose or go into more detail of those situations. But digestion is a major issue amongst stress, and clients that you see are generally going to be coming to you with stress. So that's how you can think about it in terms of your treatments. Those of you doing reflexology with me, you could think about your oil selections when it comes to digestion. So there are particular oils that will resonate with the digestive system particularly. Remember, they'll go into the blood circulation and find their sort of target organ. Peppermint is a really good example, and we all know that from drinking a peppermint tea after a heavy meal. So just a very brief overview. Our digestive system is split into 3 sections: upper, middle, and lower. And we've got structures within those 3 areas. The upper structures are the mouth and the esophagus, the food pipe. Remember, it runs parallel to the trachea, the windpipe. We've got that epiglottis, that little flap that ensures when we're breathing, it goes into the trachea, and when we're swallowing, it goes into the esophagus. We bring food into our mouth. We have mechanical and chemical digestion that takes place. Mechanical, using our teeth, our tongue, the sides of our mouth, and chemical using our saliva, particularly amylase in our saliva, which starts to break down predominantly carbohydrates, creates a bolus that's easier to swallow. The bolus goes down the esophagus, now our body takes over. Peristalsis moves that bolus into the stomach. We then go into our middle structure. The stomach is the middle structure. So our stomach is made up of rugae, and so it's able to fold out, to expand and fold back in again. And it produces its own gastric juices that predominantly help to break down protein and turn that bolus into more of a liquid called chyme. Once it's ready, that chyme is going to go into our small intestine, the first part called the duodenum. Two structures are attached to the duodenum, the pancreas to add more gastric juices, and the gallbladder, which is storing the bile that was produced by the liver, again, to produce the bile that then goes into the duodenum to help with the last process of digestion. The small intestine is about 6 meters, it's coiled. It goes from the duodenum into the jejunum into the ileum before it attaches to the large intestine or the colon. Large intestine, remember, all the absorption now has happened all through the walls of the small intestine. So now we're just dealing with waste. Got the little appendix, the little hook on the bottom there to engulf any harmful substances that have got through the digestive system, and our waste then tracks the colon. So up the ascending colon, across the transverse, down the descending, back through the sigmoid and to the exit, which is then under our conscious control for elimination of waste. So we've talked about those accessory organs, the liver, which is to do with filtration, detoxification, and storage of glycogen and iron. But for digestion, it produces bile. Once it's produced the bile, it sends the bile to a little storage unit called the gallbladder. And then when the duodenum requires it, it will send a message, and the gallbladder will release some of the bile to aid with the digestive process in the duodenum. And then we've got our pancreas, which produces more digestive juices again, but also an offshoot, and we'll talk about that then in another session, is that it produces hormones to aid with blood sugar levels. So 4 functions: ingestion or mastication, the food going into the mouth, the start of that process. Digestion, the food moving through the digestive system, and then absorption into the blood circulation before the waste is eliminated. So elimination at the end.